public session. And please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thanks for waiting for us for our executive session. We're a couple minutes later than we hoped we'd be, but we will continue with the consent agenda.
Yep. The warrants are in the packet, and we discussed the D-bus transportation authorization at finance last week, which basically, if everyone remembers, D-bus's original contract to Westford was for 3 years with the option to extend for 2. This is that 5th and final year, and we think that that is a better path than going out to bid in the market. So this just gives Jenny the authorization to do that.
Which we've traditionally done. Our finance director has traditionally done,
Yes.
negotiated with the bus contractor.
Yep, so motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Any questions on the consent agenda? Okay, all in favor? That's 7-0. Thank you.
6-0.
6-0. Sorry, I jumped to
We're
the full
keeping you
number.
honest. No
Yep.
problem.
Public comment. Obviously, anybody in the room can come to the mic and make public comment, and we also invite folks on Zoom to do so as well. You could raise your hand on Zoom, and we could pull you in and hear you and listen to your public comment. For those watching on YouTube or on WestfordCAT, for future reference, we do allow hybrid public comment, but it has to be through our Zoom link, which can be found at the top of each of our agendas. I'm not seeing anybody on Zoom or in the room for public comment, which I think means we can move on to our informational updates, starting with the superintendent and assistant superintendent update.
Thank you. First, I would like to share that I know this since it will impact the committee as well too, as we are all dreading the time when Nina retires. I do have an announcement that Kathy Mucci has officially accepted the position to be the administrative assistant to the superintendent and to support the school committee. So Kathy, if some of you are aware, she's currently the guidance administrative assistant at Stony Brook. We are fortunate. We had 3 phenomenal internal candidates who interviewed, and it was a difficult decision. But I think Kathy's going to be a great person in the role, and I know she's very excited, and I know Nina and Kathy are excited to collaborate in the transition. So Kathy's going to be able to move into the position with time for the 2 of them to work together for a little while, which is great. So we congratulate Kathy, we thank Kathy, and I know Nina was excited as well too. Last week, I actually had the opportunity to be in the schools even more than just the Wednesdays, which is normal. I normally go on Wednesdays, but on Thursday I was able to tour the buildings with Carolyn and Aaron and Magali, which was fantastic. And then Friday, we actually the principals we had to change a couple of our principal meetings, and so we decided to have an extra leadership meeting, and we did principal rounds through Stony Brook and Miller, which was just awesome as well too. So that was just a lot of fun to be able to spend that much time in 1 week in all the schools. And then on Friday, Carrie and we were invited to meet the new chancellor at UMass Lowell, Dr. Julie Chen. And so we went to UMass Lowell Friday afternoon, and we were there for like an hour and a half, hour. I mean, talking about a lot of different things in terms of relationship with Westford, from talking about supporting students to talking about professional development opportunities for staff, connections with a number of different things. And we met with, I can't remember the individuals. It was Carrie Johnston, maybe?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, because Yeah, because Magali has also been working with one of the deans of admission in terms of different pathways that we could be creating for, well, again, for students, but also for professional development for staff, whether it's increasing dual enrollment opportunities, increasing opportunities for students to be taking college level courses outside of AP at the academy, and finding ways to provide pathways for EL licensure, and I'm trying to think of what the other, just even just support for growth for our staff as well too. So it was great. It was a really great conversation. They were excited to talk about ways that, I mean, they have some relationships with other districts already, and just talking about, how are there ways that they could be supporting us? Are there ways that we could be connecting with them? Which I thought was excellent.
Yeah, and I think they're wanting to look at this as a very personalized experience with Westford. It's not like they have their menu of 3 items that we could choose from to see if this is how we want to partner. I mean, it really was a brainstorming session. So there weren't any concrete outcomes yet, but we agreed that we would go back and kind of mull it over and have more conversations, and then get back together and see if we can refine the experience so that we can benefit from that partnership with them.
Yeah. And then, do you want to say something about the district report?
Yes, I just want to mention that last week you all, families, received a letter from me because the 2022 district report card came out, and it's on the DESE website. That letter has a link directly to that, and then Magali has posted that on our school and district websites. And that's a nice balcony level snapshot of different measures for the school district vis-a-vis the state information. It's not just about accountability and test scores, while that information is there as well. But it also includes academic opportunities, enrollment information, attendance, and then there's some financial components as well in terms of per pupil expenditure. So if you haven't checked that out, I recommend you do, and then you can reach out if you have any questions, because the idea is transparency for families, but also to promote dialogue as well. And then I also just want to highlight, over the past week and a half, Kristen Lass, the new town manager, has come over twice separately because of our schedules being so busy. Dr. Chu met with her, and I did as well, and we brought her around to introduce her to central office staff. And it was a wonderful session. I think the interesting thing for me was to see how well versed in a lot of what's happening in Westford. She just seems to be up to snuff on all of it, and I really thought that part of that would be from my lens. The conversation would be, to share out and to see what she needs from us, but she actually had a lot of information about the areas that we were speaking of, which I think speaks volumes of her and the transition. And at the time, that might have been, when I met with her, that might have been her first day officially on the job. So Eric Heidemann, the assistant town manager, had taken her around to various departments. So that was a true pleasure. We look forward to working with her.
Good stuff. Thank you. School committee updates.
Well, don't all jump in at once.
Did you-
Policy, we met on Friday. We're currently focusing on looking at the kind of superintendent goal setting evaluation process, which, as we've said in the past, in previous meetings, the process has changed, and kind of the language around, the new format and the evaluation forms. So we're lining it with DESE's model for evaluation. So that's going to be the first policy wave coming very soon. So that was
Great.
kind of the main thing. There was a lot of language debating and all that fun stuff happening.
Nice. Thanks, policy. Other committee updates?
Well, finance met last week. I mentioned it under D-Bus, but we've also started reviewing our facility rental fees and procedures, and as well as early arrival elementary option, just as next in our sort of what we hope to be a ongoing routine review of those fees and revolving accounts. So that is progressing nice.
Oh, do you have more?
I did. Sorry. I wanted to mention publicly that tomorrow's select board meeting is going to do our community behavioral and mental health committee, and my own or on behalf of the committee, our thanks to Courtney Moran for being the school point of contact on that committee. And then the only other thing I had. Oh, what are you going to do?
What?
One
Go
other
ahead.
thing was.
You can do it, whatever it is. I'm not going to do it.
One other thing was, I've heard from parents that started the pre-registration process for kindergarten. So that's open, and if you're in the K-2, it's on the district website, and the K-2 principals have included the information in their newsletters. And Chris and I, 2 weeks ago, went on a tour. Now you're picking up.
Yeah,
what I'm
now
putting
I know
down.
where you're
Yeah. We went on a tour of the REACH programs. Started at Miller, went to Christophuli and Stony Brook, and ended at WA. And I know for myself, it was just really powerful. I learned a lot, increased my exposure and knowledge base of the programs that we're offering to all of our students in those classrooms, and was just really moved by the dedication and the passion of the staff members that we encountered.
That's what I would have said as well. Yeah, no, it was really, it was great. And thanks again to Courtney Moran for
Right, escorting us.
escorting us around and
Arranging
scheduling
it.
that,
Yeah.
and kind of giving us broader context when it was needed. But it was, we toured the schools anyway as a committee, but we really wanted the opportunity to spend more time in the REACH classrooms, not just pop in and pop out, so we could actually feel like we had a little better idea of what happens in those and what the day might look like. And while it was still only a half hour or a little bit more maybe in each of those schools, I think it felt different and felt like we learned a lot from that. So
Right.
it was helpful. And we'll figure out how to either collect our thoughts on that or infuse that into other things that we're doing or discussions we have. But it was a good day, yeah. And on that note,
Can I just
yeah,
add something
please.
there? Because on Friday, I had the opportunity to visit a number of those classes that you had visited. And the teachers, and some of the students, but more so the teachers, were really, I think, moved by the fact that you came to visit. So that, I think, was great. There was an initial concern as to why.
Why?
Right? And when I was like, just because they want to really see the full spectrum of the programming that we have, but they were very touched by that, and they felt very supported by it. So I think that was great. I'm glad that was able to take place.
And especially at the younger grade levels,
Yeah.
I feel like the thanks should just be like, thanks for tolerating our disruption to your room, right? Because 4 adults walk in and,
Right.
It's
a disruption.
Yeah.
That's right.
But they were really helpful. They were very open.
Oh, yes.
They were
It's
very
mostly
welcoming as well.
a joke,
so,
but yeah.
And I'm going to just pause because this is. I'm going to try to get rid of that.
That's your face
This is
behind
not,
you?
This is not like a memorial
I didn't say
service
that.
for
Yeah,
me.
that was not me. I didn't say
Oh my
that.
God.
That was definitely one of your colleagues on the committee that made that comment. It was not me.
It's like a retirement.
But I can understand why that would be awkward, having your picture behind you.
Yeah.
And then he showed up in person.
It looks like he's really on camera. It's actually it's a good picture. You would think.
With it.
Whenever you're talking, there's a giant head of you behind you.
I'm going to carry a screen around. all the
Yeah.
time.
Are you going to be able to pull up the
Yes,
presentation?
I will be able to. Yes. And then it will go away. So that'll be good.
It is like I expect you to start speaking.
I can go behind the screen if you'd like. It's
pretty good.
Do you, is this a joke?
I have a brief update.
Okay, thank you.
Are you good, Valerie?
I am, thank
Chris?
you.
Okay.
I know,
Back
I
Back
was
to
like,
the meeting.
Thank you.
CPAC's meeting this week, Wednesday. It's a Zoom meeting. For those who don't know, CPAC Special Education Parent Advisory Council via Zoom. It's been a few months since we've had one, so I figured it's worth plugging. So
Thanks, Sean.
Where can that link be found? Is it on the district website?
That's-
I think it is,
we
right?
Yeah.
is it on the district website? I get it through social media.
Facebook page.
Okay.
They do have a Facebook.
I think it's on the
Yeah.
website as
Yeah.
well.
Okay.
And typically it's also shared on the Westford Special Education Parent Forum Facebook group too.
Right.
So
Okay.
it's a few places.
Thank you. Okay. Are we ready for student updates?
Okay, so we have quite a bit this week.
Okay.
Obviously we have February break next week, so it'll be a nice break. But in terms of sports, the girls indoor track won DCLs for first time in a long time, so that was really exciting for them. The guys basketball won their DCL competition as well. The girls basketball senior night is this Thursday if anyone would like to come and support them. Capstone, our forms were just due last week, so it'll be really exciting to see all of our projects in the next coming weeks. I know I'm super excited about mine. And for students that have more than 4 AP classes,
More school.
you know, they're going to spend their time working on their respective classes. But it's a really exciting time in general. So I thought I'd add that. And another important update is that grades, I believe, came out last week. Now, there was some issue with Power School, clearly, because it was supposed to come out a little bit earlier. But I know Mrs. Brown and a lot of her other colleagues have been working really hard to fix the certain issues that have come up. Another important thing regarding that is that for parents of seniors, if you want to know, our GPAs haven't been recalculated as they've been sent out, but at the bottom they have added a very clear statement that the GPA hasn't been recalculated. So just if anyone would like to know about that, that was what was sent on the transcripts to colleges, the same GPA as the end of the junior year. So that is what I wanted to bring up.
Yeah.
Not the end of junior year?
Yeah.
Yeah, so basically, when we send our quarter one grades to colleges, our GPA doesn't get recalculated because it's said that it's going to get recalculated at the semester. But because of the issues with Power School, and it's been a lot, from my understanding, we have just held back on recalculating the GPA for the reason that most colleges recalculate it on their own by entering their own scores. So, but like a statement has been made on all of our transcripts that they haven't recalculated it since the end of our junior year.
Just as a note, it does look like some report cards still are not in the system in Power
Oh.
School.
Oh.
Because I know they got the senior ones in last week. I know I think
okay.
they were prioritizing
I'm
that.
sorry, I
Yeah.
thought that
Yeah.
all of them had been.
Because I was checking, because I know as of Friday they didn't have
Yeah.
the others, so I think it's
Okay,
just seniors
so-
at this point. But I'm
Yes.
guessing any day now.
Yes.
is
Yeah.
what I think we
It's
heard.
been a long week for
Yep.
our
Yep.
administrators. I know I was talking to Ms. Brown today, and she was really tired. So they should be coming out then soon. Senior ones at least have been taken care of to that extent.
Yeah. And then I guess on the college process, juniors had their first college meeting, college to career readiness meeting, and then parents also had a meeting that same day. I believe it was last Wednesday. So they had like a nice presentation during the long block, and then parents had the same presentation just with more financial aid information. And then we, as a Westford Academy student government, STUCO, Legislative Council, and the Student Advisory Committee, had our joint meeting where we worked together to develop a plan on kind of discussing how we would deliver the information that was discussed with the feasibility study to the middle schoolers. And we're planning on giving presentations to both Blanchard and Stony Brook. The Blanchard one will be on the 1st of March. And then the Stony Brook one is the 1st of March. And the Blanchard one, we still haven't gotten a final date yet. But we're planning on giving a presentation to kind of discuss what the middle schoolers' ideas are about the feasibility study, especially looking at changing the grade configuration and kind of, especially since there's like 6th graders, 7th graders, 8th graders, they'll really have that first-hand experience of that switch. So they'll be able to give really good information about that. And then we'll present that information once we get it. And then also on that same line, we also had a meeting with Mr. Antonelli and Mrs. Wallace where we discussed the food service and the lunchroom, as well as we talked about different sustainability options and the lunch options for the menu. And then finally, there's going to be the 5th advisory of the school year this Wednesday, where there's going to be about the course selection process for 9th, 10th, and 11th graders. And then there's also going to be a presentation on anxiety and depression for seniors. So,
As well as screening for seniors.
as well as screening for seniors, yeah.
And the last thing I want to say, which I just remembered, was we're sort of in
One more thing. Keep on
we're
going.
sort of in talks about potentially like holding some sort of event or something for the 8th graders again, where we sort of discuss what courses, our opinions about specific courses, what the course load is, you know, the difficulty of the classes, which I think could be really informational for them, right? Because they're seeing all these descriptions, but it'd be really good to understand from a student's perspective what it's like. So we were sort of just opening the talks about that.
And then also connecting to the 8th graders. The 8th graders are coming to WA tomorrow, and peer counselors are giving tours during 2 blocks to all the 8th graders, as well as a presentation. So, yeah.
Is that, I was just gonna, has that always happened? The 8th graders coming? I'm trying to
Yeah.
remember.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay.
I'm also trying to remember. I'm sitting here thinking like,
That's
It
great.
I
hasn't
remember
always-
we went on those.
I remember, yeah.
I
we
remember
went
going
on
on
We've done
those.
different
So it
things
has
over
happened,
the
but
years.
not necessarily
It
every
has
year.
happened.
COVID.
Different things have happened, and then COVID threw a little wrench into when people were.
That's great. It's really nice.
But they
I'm
kind
sure
of went back and
appreciate
forth
that.
as to whether there were times whether both schools were going together at one time, whether each school did something separately. So over the years, it's been different. Yeah.
Thanks.
I just wanted to say it's so exciting to hear the engagement from the high school level down into the middle school. I just think it's genius with the feasibility study and to get that information. And I suppose, you know, Gloria and I touched on this, but I suppose you really do represent all grades levels, so it's amazing to see that approach. I think I'm really excited about what you guys find out.
We look forward to hearing about it. Thank you. Okay, is that it? We're good?
That is it.
Oh, that was good.
a good one.
It wasn't as long as I thought it was going to be based on what you said. Appreciate it, as always. We're going to move on to our first item under business, which is our K-5 literacy program pilot. And so I welcome Magali Ronan, Aaron Hogan, and Carolyn McHugh to the microphone. And I'll bring up the presentation.
Thank you. Bye, Chris.
I know. God.
It looks like you, but not exactly like you, so
It's
it's
like an AI-generated image.
Maybe that's what it is.
He used a filter.
Maybe that's what it is. Sorry, I'm just trying to make sure I'm getting this thing.
I think now it should be
Okay.
like
There we go.
That's much better.
You can leave it up the whole time if you want.
Yeah, I'm with you.
it's still up there.
Watching from the corner.
Welcome. Thank you for coming. And
So we have, Carolyn is our K-2 literacy and social studies, so we appointed humanities curriculum coordinator, and Erin is our 3 to 5 humanities. So they've been working together on this project. This is Carolyn's first year here. Erin, is this year 3 for you?
Yes.
3rd year. So they're excited to be here.
Yes. So we've been lucky enough over the past few years to really start delving into the science of reading with our work with the Early Literacy Grant. And Carolyn and I have been working really closely with teachers this year to disseminate more of that information. And as we've really been able to delve into that work, we've discovered the real need for a vertically and horizontally aligned ELA or literacy curriculum, meaning that it's aligned between and within the grade levels. So in order to follow the school committee policy P6106 and 6119, we've started vetting different curricula using Ed Reports and Curate. And we've also been able to speak to many leaders in the state who are also either piloting or implementing literacy curriculum. And we've been lucky enough to meet with the leadership team here many times to get their input, and we have started to put together a team of pilot teachers to look into the curricula that we have found that we think would best meet our needs.
So curriculum really facilitates a better use of the state standards, right? And teacher professional development as well. You know, having consistent curriculum also ensures that structures and routines consistently are showing up for kids so that they can really go deep in the most important areas. Also, having consistent protocols and routines ensure that kids aren't learning new ones each year.
And as we've been researching high quality curriculum materials, equity kept coming up as a major theme. So really the materials that are put in front of students does dictate their educational experience. And so curriculum really is the first step in equity. And why that really is because with a curriculum, we are ensuring that every student has access to high quality curriculum materials every day. And our teachers work really hard to develop their lessons and units and things now. They're spending a lot of time searching for resources, so we ask why not give them something that is research-based that can help them provide systematic, coherent, and explicit instruction. And really, as we're delving into this science of reading, it really is the essential first step for our instructional changes.
Of course, materials matter for ELA and literacy in terms of having, you know, equity of access. All students have access to grade appropriate assignments. Highly rated curricular materials affect teachers' use of more evidence-based instructional practices. And then as for the quality of the text, highly rated curricular materials really serve up a steady diet, right, of texts that are grade appropriate, relevant, diverse, and worthy of students' attention.
So our Massachusetts frameworks align to the Common Core standards, and we use the site Achieve the Core for help and assistance and resources in making sure that we are aligning to the standards. And in order to do that, something that we've discovered in our research is that Achieve the Core has a list of do this and don't do this. And so they suggest do adopt content-rich, aligned instructional materials because that builds knowledge around topics. It has a greater impact on reading comprehension than just focusing strictly on strategies. And they really suggest stopping using a patchwork of materials and resources.
So we have been training teachers in the science of reading for the past 3 years through the early literacy grant with wider dissemination this year. So now we're hoping to move from that why to the how and provide the materials in order to be able to do so.
The next few slides we won't read aloud to you. I know they're in the packet, so you can take a look at those whenever you can. We've heard from teachers. They've been real advocates for this as well. So this slide and the next are just voices from various teachers that we've heard from that span grade levels K to 5. So feel free to keep going there. Yep. And that one too. Thank you. And then I won't read this next one to you either, but these are quotes and ideas provided by leaders in the field as well as renowned institutions. But just to summarize what they're saying is in this shift that we're experiencing right now, it's a really complex way of teaching, and we really can't expect teachers to just figure it out on their own anymore.
So what do core literacy programs look like? Well, students are building knowledge through carefully curated core texts that are rich with content that piques curiosity, that represent grade level complexity, and that showcase diverse perspectives. These programs are supported by the science of reading. So through a rigorous learning design based on research, students gain content knowledge and an awareness of how to read text, write, listen, and speak. Additionally, formative assessments are built in, and the research-based supports for multilingual learners are there as well. And what's nice about these programs is there's a focus on depth. So students are really digging deep into the modules. They're exploring informational topics, literacy, fine arts, genres, to create layers of knowledge so that they'll build on across the lessons. And then finally, students are reading information-rich books, not basals. So students are engaging with complex grade-level books, from the classics to newer works of literature. These texts are used at every turn to help students master essential ELA skills, and strategies are given to help all learners to access those texts. Students engage with real-world issues, so in terms of content knowledge, science, and social studies topics are part of the units as well.
So this is the process we've started so far in bringing together our pilot team. So we have 2 curricula that we've decided to pilot, and we're planning on doing a launch professional development with our teacher volunteers in late February and early March, one for each program. And our hope is to start mid-March with both sets of teachers starting to implement and teach those programs. Throughout our pilot experience, which will be about 8 to 9 weeks, there will be also Q&A sessions with the publishers of the programs, as well as Carolyn, myself, and the literacy specialists. So we'll have some Q&As with the publishers, some with us, and then we're hoping to have a final meeting in late May where teachers share their experience. We use a rubric that we have adapted from Curate and hopefully make our final decision. In terms of just to gauge an interest, when we put this together on Friday, we had 35 teachers interested in piloting. As of today, it's 42.
That's great.
And the hope was to get 18.
18.
So that's exciting. And one other piece of information in terms of timeline. So this timeline is very specific to the pilot. And after that, once they've tailored it down to have a single recommendation, that will go to the superintendent. And then once approved, the superintendent will bring it to all of you for approval, full approval of a purchase for next school year. And the hope would be that it would roll out then. And I think we talked about doing a K-5 rollout, in which case we would shift thinking. And I know Magali has been working with these 2 coordinators on drafting kind of a new template for professional development next year, so that all of K-5 will solely be focused on this work.
Wow. Great. Thank you for the presentation. I bet there are questions from the committee, so let's open it up.
Could I ask just if you could speak to, first of all, I have to say I'm very excited about this. I completely understand the need for it. You know, as a parent with students who have dyslexia, I also, you know, I've been very much involved and up to date in reading about, you know, the science of reading and where that shift is in terms of kind of educational knowledge. But the 2 curricula, I'm just curious, kind of, you know, can we speak to the 2 that we're looking at, and in what way you're looking at piloting them? You know, is it, you know, there's clearly going to be 2 sets of teachers, but are they across different schools, across the grade level, that kind of thing? Just get some information on how we're kind of actually piloting.
Yes, to answer that last part, they are distributed across grades and the 6 schools, so that we can ensure all the voices are heard. We're excited about these particular programs because they're so accessible and engaging to the diverse learners that we have. So in terms thinking of like our UDL framework, they lend themselves nicely to that, and then they're research supported, which is wonderful.
Could I also come in and ask as well on that? You know, one of the things I think, and you know, I've raised it before, is when we talk about ELA, you know, and we, you know, often have the results here, we typically only, especially in the lower grades, I know we assess dibbles and stuff, we don't always talk about how or if we do assess writing within the district level. And I'm just wondering, with these curricula that we're bringing in, is it a full 360 kind of ELA, or is it just kind of the reading component, or is there a writing component to it, or, you know, just to give me some clarification on that?
Yes, this is the whole shebang. So in speaking of the science of reading, we really have our foundational skills focus, and then we also have our language comprehension focus. So this is the language comprehension piece, and writing is embedded within it as well. So we're looking forward to consistency there, especially in the different routines that could build from grade level to grade level.
Thanks. Meghna?
I was wondering if testing would look the same, in the sense that I remember when I was in K through 5, specifically like 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, we had the CBA assessments, in which is how they would judge our like literary abilities. So I was wondering how that would look if we are sort of shifting this sort of curriculum. Do you have, like, it's okay if you don't. I was just wondering.
Well, so now we use dibbles to assess our
Oh,
foundational
I see,
reading
I
skills,
see.
and then we have
I
next
see.
step in guided reading for our comprehension skills.
Yeah.
But as Carolyn had mentioned too, these curricula also come with formative assessments built in, which usually come at the end of a module and then also within spaced throughout. So there would also be the opportunity for us to get together and really look at student work as a team as well.
Can I jump in right after that? Just for, I have a couple thoughts, but a specific follow-up to that is, are those, the change in assessment and is that reflected in our current report cards? It's like, so are the standards that are in the current report cards for elementary, will they match what is in this pilot and the shift to science of reading?
Yeah, because with our report cards being standards-based, it aligns great with these programs.
We have benchmarks that we created to help us determine how to score on the report card, so we may need a few tweaks there. But as Carolyn said, they're aligned to the Massachusetts standards.
Can I ask a question about
Well, hold on, I'm going to go to Gloria.
Oh, okay, sorry,
Put her hand
Gloria.
up, yeah, and then
I didn't see her.
we'll go there.
No, sure, don't worry about it. You can also skip me.
I'm not going to.
Off the base.
Sorry.
You know, you ask us to talk about reading, we're all going to ask questions. I guess I have two questions. One that's just kind of, I guess, based on my own educational theory naivete. The presentation talks about content-rich texts and information-rich texts. To the layperson in me, I'm thinking, does that all mean nonfiction-based texts, or does it also include what we normally say, what the fictional stories that get at feelings and exploring, you know, those other aspects of connecting with stories and magic and fantasy and all those other things? So are both components, or is this very, okay. I'm seeing head nods.
Absolutely, yep, there's both the fine arts, literature, so fiction, and then nonfiction too, yes.
Okay.
They really strive for like a 50-50 split. And one thing we're really excited about too in our research, it's the science of reading has really been in order to develop a deep knowledge of content and to build background knowledge for future social studies, science topics, and things like that. We've been looking a lot into building coherent text sets, so you're really focusing on a topic and really delving into it, and these do that through various genres.
Okay, but it's got both those components. Okay,
Yes.
I wasn't sure with some of the terms in there. I was like, that's still there, right? The other question I had was really process-based. I mean, this is really exciting, and of course you want to maximize the success of this program. So how is staff going to be supported through this pilot. It sounds like this is a lot new at this time of the year to incorporate. And, we do tend to also try to be cognizant of if we're adding something, kind of what gets taken away. Just like how are we supporting staff and students in this new pilot?
What's really neat about that is we haven't had to try hard in terms of asking people, can you sign up? We got people that just on their own signed up, so that's awesome. It shows that they want to give it a try and have a say in it. And we'll absolutely be there along the way to support them, in the beginning as they're implementing it. It's going to be a huge focus for us this spring because we want it to be successful, and we really want to see which one should we go with. So we want to be a big part of that as well as the publishers themselves when they come in and work with the teachers.
I think to that end, if I could just interrupt for a second, I think one of the things that you shared with me that you've been hearing, and it is reflected in some of these quotes that they've shared, is that it's not actually something that we're putting on people's plates as much as it's something the teachers have been asking for. Yeah. And it's something that they've been they're actually requesting this type of support because they've been trying to use their resources to support the science of reading. And so I feel like it's that nice balance, because I hear what you're talking about too, because we've said, we're trying to alleviate some of the pressures. And I think the goal here is to find curriculum materials that do just that.
And I think what would be taking away is that those pilot teachers won't have to, on a daily basis, figure out what their stations are, their literacy centers are in tomorrow's reading block, because now they will have the resources. So this will replace what they're currently doing in a much more guided and succinct way.
And they'll know that the resources that they have are research-based, high quality, and complex as well. And the publishers that we've been working with too, our launch PD is a full day professional development. They're providing us with Q&As sheets for the teachers to keep track of while they're going. We have check-ins with them as well, and the literacy specialists are also really invested and want to be a huge part of it as well.
Right. Mari?
I feel like I'm lacking clarity, so I'm just going to ask some follow-up questions. Okay, so you're saying that you're launching with 2 publishers. Are these 2 different publishers? Okay, and then I won't ask you where it is because apparently they're not named in here, but whatever. And so after you pilot this with 2 different publishers, how do you determine, because I don't see a process here, how you're going to determine who wins or whatever, and what's the criteria for that, and who's going to give feedback into that process? I just feel like that's the part that I don't get. I get how you're going to set this up, but then how do you assess what you're going to move forward to, and what was a success, I guess?
So we have so Curate is curriculum ratings by teachers in Massachusetts, and we have their rubric, and we've amended it to fit our needs. So teachers will be provided with that rubric to make notes on as they go, and we'll also look at it together when we have our check-in meetings with them. So that will be a major part of our final meeting when we come together and tabulate where the curriculum stacked up in terms of that particular rubric, and in terms of what teachers found as pros and cons as well.
So mostly teacher feedback is going to be the qualitative data, right?
And we've already been using Ed Reports and Curate, so they are rated green meeting standards now, so it's really just what meets our needs the best at this point.
Could you explain that a little bit more? Because I think I don't know if anybody understands exactly what you just said.
Ed Reports
with
and
Ed
Curate.
Reports
Okay.
and Curate. If you can break that down.
I appreciate it, because I was going to ask that too.
Yeah.
Explain it to me like someone who doesn't know what you're talking about.
So Ed Reports is a site where it goes through a really rigorous review process, and they do math, they do science, they do various curricula, and there's many different categories that
Ed
you can
Reports
go
is a
through.
website, is an app, is a...
Yeah, it's a website that
Okay.
you can go and search really any curricula that has been vetted by them. It's pretty robust. And they have many different categories, and you can go in and see where they met expectations, where they did not, and then there's an overall rating there. So we only looked at curricula that met expectations on there.
So Ed Reports is like an independent company or something that they do this?
It's consumer reports for
Yes.
curriculum,
Yeah.
it sounds like.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then there's also Curate, which is something similar but done just by Massachusetts teachers. So they use Ed Reports, but then they also dig in, and it's Massachusetts teachers also rating curricula.
Okay. So then we're going to be doing that in-house.
Yeah, so these programs were done already, but we're going to do it again with us.
Okay.
Those other websites and data collection tools are how they narrowed down to these two. Now choosing between, and it is funny that we haven't said the name of either one, and it sounds like it's supposed to be mysterious. It is
secret?
not.
Oh,
it's not.
It's
Okay.
EL and Wit and Wisdom.
I thought it was like
no
a proprietary
secret.
thing.
Well, I'm a major stakeholder in both of them, that's why we didn't know.
I'm so confused.
Can you say it again? EL?
EL.
Wit and Wisdom.
Okay, thank you.
EL stands for Expeditionary Learning.
Okay. I was gonna say one has a better name, but expeditionary learning is a pretty good name too, so I'll withhold judgment. Mari, did you have anything else?
That was like my main question was around like the, you know, how you guys were gonna assess it, which ones they were. And I guess to follow up on Gloria's question, because I thought Gloria was going in a different direction with her question, but you guys talked a lot about equity and in the texts and stuff. So I guess I would like to know a little bit more about that, because one of the things that I've been thinking about some of the texts that continue to be taught is like there's a lot of really good stuff that's being published right now, right? Like there's some things that are tried and true, but there's a lot of really good stuff that's being written and targeted towards kids and growth. And so I was wondering, like, when you talked about the equity piece, this is already part of the curricula? Okay, so you're not picking new books, it's like part of what comes with the packet. Okay,
Correct.
thank you.
Yeah, and you know, you hear about the Matthew effects in reading where like the skilled readers become more and more skilled and the less skilled readers less skilled, because skilled readers can access this wonderful like language and rich syntax. But what's nice about these programs is through the read alouds, all the students are hearing that, because we know how listening comprehension outpaces reading comprehension till age 13. So that's an
I love how she
important
brings us along.
component
She's
of
like,
the
we all know that.
activity.
We're like,
Yeah, one of the big shifts are really where instead of putting kids in leveled books, they're accessing grade level text or above grade level text if it's being read out loud. They're all getting exposed to it, and really what we're helping teachers to do now is to help students access those texts.
It's also worth noting, you know, I think it's important for everyone to understand, DESE has also come out about the science of reading, and they have gone even to the point of saying, if you are still using these curricula in your schools, maybe it's time for a rethink. So the fact they've come out so strongly about it, like this is something we have to do for our students and our teachers as well, but you know, obviously it's for the students. So this, the fact that DESE are backing this, I think is also important to know.
So Valerie and then Barn.
I feel like I know just enough about science of reading to be dangerous. There was a talk at our school committee conference in November that really piqued my interest. I hadn't been exposed to that at all, and I have listened to podcasts since and just read things, and so I'm really invested in the success of this. I think it's definitely the direction that the district. It's exciting to see movement in that way. But I guess I'm echoing a little bit of Gloria's comments about how to support the teachers. And so just as I feel like we don't talk about curriculum very often, right? Because there's not a lot of changes maybe to them that come to us. But I just wanted to understand more of is this a typical timeline? Like, because it feels like March is like conferences and a marking period ends, and then like the kids are sort of in full swing for the year, and so now you're kind of changing things in the last couple of months, and I guess as a parent, I'm also kind of wondering, like, what if, like, they're research back, so it's not like they're getting bad, like, it's not like you get to the end and realize, oh no.
It's not like they're homeschooling with me, which would be like really bad, right? It's something established.
Right. So I guess if you could just talk a little bit about this time of year for that rollout, and if this is the ideal timeline that it would be, or is this shorter or longer? I don't know.
And that I had a similar question, which was, what are the challenges doing it this late in the year when you've had, 6-7 months or whatever it is of, ELA curriculum and shifting gears like that. So I think that's a similar vein.
It's funny. I think like the first challenge that kind of came to my mind as you were talking was around like getting sub coverage in order for those teachers to be able to attend the professional development. But I'm not sure that that's specific to this time of year necessarily. So that's more of, I think, probably an ongoing concern. The principals are always flexible and, we'll make it happen, but I know it's not easy as far as logistics.
And sorry, I know that you're speaking, but the teachers have already planned, like as we said, it's aligned with the standards. So they're just going to essentially use a different resource to teach the standards that they would have already planned for in that time frame of the school year.
But don't they already have resources planned, and then now this is a different?
They do, but I just will interrupt. Sorry to just say that I think the bigger piece here is that they were hoping for 18, and they have 42 teachers who are eager to do this with this understood timeline. It's not like they're just asking for participants and haven't told them the timeline yet. They're actually buying in right now because they're like, yes, they want to do this. Because when they met with me and presented this to me, I actually think the bigger challenge is we can't wait.
Yeah.
So ideally, they might tell you, and I don't know if doing something earlier in the year is a better timeline for piloting. Maybe. I don't necessarily know. I actually think it probably is easier to try new things in the spring because all of the different, all of the different, just the relationships and right there. But it's more about the teacher's eagerness and their eagerness to try to identify which of these two really strong curricula would be best for us to try to move forward with, so that we don't lose an entire year of implementation.
The teachers know the students now, right?
That's right.
People are in their routines, like the honeymoon period's over, like, it happens at the first month and a half of school, like people are getting to know each other. If you guys are good with it, I don't actually think
it's a good question, but I think
And
that's,
you have 42 teachers.
And to your point, is it safe to say that when you get a curriculum, I don't know what it looks like when you download a curriculum, it has a menu so that when you're looking at particular standards, teachers will be able to go, oh, this matches what I wanted to do. So it's relatively easy for them to plug it into what they were going to do during this pilot period.
Right, and when we were meeting with the publishers too, we know various people that have done a full year, who have done, it varies, but they said to get a solid pilot, you need 8 to 12 weeks. So they can certainly fit it in within our timeline. And we can work with what modules that we pilot and to make sure it fits teachers' needs, but also to make sure that the protocols and the routines are being built so that it is successful for the teachers and the students as well.
Feel better.
Yeah, I have just one more question, sorry, and I know you're waiting. When you said that Catherine had sort of asked, is it the whole shebang, and you said it was language comprehension, is that just the pilot, and then we would buy into the other 6 or 5 literacy buckets, or is it this is permanent, that it is only language comprehension? I'm not asking that well at all, but I hope
it definitely makes sense.
You're nodding, so I'm going to just stop there because you're the literacy people. I'll let you speak.
For now, you did your day course.
We have the resources for the foundational skills. So those components we're talking about, the language comprehension is today what we're talking about, but we have the resources for the foundational skills already.
And you feel that those are, because what I was picking up in this was like to avoid the patchwork, the piecemeal thing, right? And the alignment vertically and horizontal that you're talking about. So do you feel that the foundational skills is already meeting those goals of being aligned and not piecemeal?
We think so, yes.
Yeah, and we're continuing to train K-2 teachers this year.
Right,
So we're
yeah.
getting that like rock solid
Okay.
What
Okay.
are,
as we speak.
when you talk about the foundational pieces, we're talking about Hegarty and
Lively letters.
lively letters. Okay, just basically those two, the Hegarty and lively letters, are the only kind of that do the foundational skills. Okay.
Okay, going to Barn.
I just had a quick question just to clarify. I don't really know much about like curriculum, so like when you're talking about like implementing a new curriculum and like the different modules, like is that like different like units, or are they like how does that work?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Different units. There's about, I think both programs have 4 throughout the year, and they delve deep onto certain topics.
So then to follow up on that, like are the units different between the two programs? And then like if you get feedback from teachers that says like, okay, like unit 2 in program 1 is like not up to like what we want, but unit 2 in program 2 is like really good. Does it make sense to like mix and match those, or does that like not work?
We would have to buy both curricula
okay.
to do that. But we're just going to be piloting like one module for the rest of this year.
Okay.
But the good thing about the sites that we use to vet the curricula, they give you the pros and cons, so we can delve in that way too. And we're planning on having a full year of training and professional development on literacy for teachers next year too, which can help us make it through that and make those decisions.
Any last questions before I let? Yeah. Any question from the audience?
Sue Thomas, parent of a graduate.
Would you mind, do you want to just come up to the chair? Because
Join
it's
us.
going to be a transition time anyway, so we'll get you on the microphone. Thank
Hi.
you, Sue.
Sue Thomas, 7 Old Homestead, parent of a WA graduate, so it's been a long time since K through 5. But my question is, in observing young learners, they are often more engaged when you can pick a topic that they've already expressed an interest in that's at their grade level. So I was interested in the flexibility of the program if there's something that isn't in a particular module, but that a teacher knows will inspire a certain child. Do they have the flexibility to pursue reading material on that topic with the class?
That's a great question. So in terms of like the actual units, we want to keep consistency, so there is vertical and horizontal alignment between the grades. But that being said, there's always the opportunity for independent read alouds, for small group work with students, and for independent reading time for students as well.
Great, thank you. Thank you.
Could be here
Okay.
anyway. Thank you so much.
Thank you so
I hope
much.
you interpret our questions as the keen curiosity that it is, and not any sort of skepticism. I think we all just really were interested to hear. And as Valerie said, we haven't had a new curriculum presentation in a while, so it was fun to get to hear some of the details and learn from you. So good luck with the pilot. We look forward to hearing
You'll be back.
late May, early June probably, like how things went.
Oh, we appreciate the questions. Thank you
Yes,
all.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sounds great.
And as always, you can stay and listen to the rest. It's up to you. It's going to be fun, but it's also 8:04. So
Thank you.
thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. Next, we have Sue Thomas, the Westford Sustainability Coordinator. Thank you so much. We're going to talk about sustainability goals and efforts both at the town level and then how that intermeshes with the school level and what we all can look forward to and think about doing going forward.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. It's very exciting that you've set this strategic goal, and I really appreciate your time tonight. I hope I've sort of, as is my habit, put together a really dense presentation. For those of you who know me, I don't intend to cover all of it in depth, but it's there if you wish to come back to me, because I see this hopefully as an introductory conversation where we can start to talk about what's possible
and think about, you know, both short-term and long-term goals. So I did sort of go for the comprehensive, and feel free to interrupt me if you want me to go more in-depth into something. But next slide, please. So I am the sustainability coordinator shared between Carlisle and Westford. So I'm 50-50. Through the end of this fiscal year, I'm grant funded, and I am currently not in the operating budget in either town. So hopefully we can continue this collaboration, but there is also a short-term deadline at the moment. I have lived in town almost 20 years now. I have quite a background in municipal government in terms of committee participation. I currently still have a seat on the Westford Clean Energy and Sustainability Committee, and I serve on the Roadmap Subcommittee, which is the subcommittee that's put together the Westford Climate Roadmap. We are like on the cusp of releasing version 2. I'm not going to go through the specific goals of the roadmap because there are some new ones and it's lengthy. I've just sort of touched on the general topic areas tonight. And when the roadmap is released, I encourage you to read it because we've incorporated over a year worth of presentations. I know you guys have had one, and feedback from the community into it. Next slide, please. So what is a sustainability coordinator? It's different from town to town, depending on where the focus of that role is. In Westford, I'm really a resource to help people understand decarbonization and sustainability, and I'll talk about this next. I am here to help plan, prioritize, and execute the climate roadmap, and that is the whole town. It's not just the municipality, it's the public involvement and the business community involvement, because when we did the greenhouse gas inventory, we found out that we're not quite the bedroom community we think we are, and about a third of our emissions are also business. So the job is very sweeping, and so it is a coordination type position. I rely on expertise from other folks, and I'm collecting information. And the reason legislation is so important is, if you haven't heard, there is a whole ton of dollars coming down from the federal and state government. A lot of it's legislation, some of it is still being packaged into funding. And as the town goes through this transformative phase, it's really important that we start to think about and position and plan for that funding so that we're ready to capture it when it arrives. And some of those things definitely impact the schools. So a lot of my job is to also seek, advocate, understand funding, and share that information back out with the public, with the schools, with the municipality, with the businesses about how we can all participate in these changes. And so education outreach is the job. Please, next slide. So, I think we skipped one, but
No.
nope, okay, go ahead. Thank you. The district-wide activities, so there are, in decarbonization, we're really talking about energy, buildings, and transportation, right? So those are not things we can address some of those things at the individual schools, but a lot of it is a district-wide thing. So municipal energy is contracted for the town. It's about 80% renewables now. We would expect that to continue or get better. The building infrastructure, you guys are doing a huge amount of work in that already between the industrial grade audit and the, I always for space planning facility study that you're doing. So you have a lot of work already going on in that area, and we have the ongoing Green Communities grant that can support energy efficiency, conservation, weatherization type issues. In the opening picture, you may have seen that Abbott's windows were open. So we still have some work to do in terms of balancing our infrastructure and sealing up those envelopes so that when we convert to an electric infrastructure, we can do that efficiently. So town-wide, you know, we want to add renewables too in town, so that's a whole planning effort. I would like to have all of the roofs assessed for solar if they don't get included in some of this other work going on, and parking lots, and start thinking about where we're gonna, how that works for the town and how it works for the people who might charge there, and identifying who they are. Are those teachers? Are they, you know, townspeople? who is going to use our charging infrastructure, and therefore how are we going to place it? And that's going to drive economic development in the town. It might drive recruiting for the schools. There are businesses who are putting in parking garages filled with electric infrastructure in order to recruit employees to come back to work, charge at work for free. So in terms of school fleets, the school district has been very open to starting discussions about how we might electrify the school fleet. And we're looking at the special ed fleet first because we're not eligible for a lot of the big yellow bus funding yet. But that is something we're kind of opening the door to conversation about, thinking about how we might transition with the vendors to do that. You all have the electric mail courier vehicle already, so looking at a charge plan for how to charge that. And then talking about small engines, which are, lawn maintenance. Next slide, please. So at the school level, when I talk about nudges to empower, a lot of what we do, if you think about the supermarket, you go to the supermarket and at the end of each row or at the checkout, they're trying to encourage you to buy things on an impulse basis. You can do that with good behavior too. So a lot of what we want to do in the schools, we want to make transparent if we can. Infrastructure is scary and invisible to a lot of people. So the solar power generation at Stony Brook, I don't know to what degree that's integrated into the curriculum now, but you can have the power be visible to the students so they can see how much we're generating, what offsets. Lighting upgrades are obviously visible, but you can also talk about what you might not want to light up outside. So each of these things that we're talking about could be an individual campaign, they could be a curriculum focus, and they would make real these huge issues on a basis that empowers the students and the families to feel like they're engaged with it and they can make a difference not only in the school but when they go home or when they go to work. Because that's one of the real advantages. You guys have access to such a bulk of the community and they want to be engaged with you, whereas they might not have found me yet. Idling, pet peeve of mine, really increased during COVID, and it's still an issue, and I think people don't understand the health concerns, so that's an opportunity to work with the Board of Health, communicate more about how idling is impacting the health of our students right now. Lexington went to net zero in their schools. This is a big example before any of these incentives happened, and they have a lot to speak to us about in terms of how that became a health and safety and job satisfaction issue for their staff and their students and how it improved their learning outcomes. And they've tracked that data. So none of these things that I mentioned in this presentation are groundbreaking. We have other people who have followed this path before us. We can pick that example and say, this is what we want to do. How are we going to do it, and follow a path and have a pretty good idea of what our metrics will look like on the other side. So while it seems overwhelming, there's just so much opportunity in it. While we will make mistakes, we won't make hopefully huge ones because there is a path already blazed for us. The vending machine thing, energy misers allow the vending machine to turn off and sense your presence and then turn back on. And so that's kind of a nice flashy thing for your students to realize. I mean, if you've ever seen them in a grocery store, the first time I saw them, I thought they'd had a power outage. And then I walked down the aisle and it's like being in a movie. You know, all the freezer cases go on as you walk down. The vending machines will do the same thing. So that's kind of an easy, flashy, engaging thing for certain age levels. Next. So a lot of this, besides the infrastructure piece, when we talk about sustainability, is a cultural shift. You know, we talk about more is better, bigger is better. We're starting to maybe rethink that, particularly with regard to solid waste here in town, but also it can translate to any sort of purchasing behavior or lifestyle behavior that you might want to apply it to. And so in this in the schools, we can start to, as we're exposing people to new ideas, expose them to new cultural ideas as well. Next slide. You've already done this because you adopted a clean energy and sustainability policy in May of last year that touches specifically on certain areas, and if those are areas we can collaborate on, I'm happy to help you with doing the analysis. They sound easy, sometimes they're not. Like, for example, you could get a grant to put dishwashers back in the cafeterias, but that would change some of your labor planning, some of your staffing, it would change the way you schedule lunch. So as you look at these things, they sound discrete and easy, but each of them is kind of an analysis task, either at the school who might want to pilot and champion it, or at the district level. And that's why it requires a little more coordination and planning and analysis up front as you pick where you're going to head with each of these ideas. Next slide. So district-wide, there's a whole bunch here. Food waste has been the thing I am hearing from your community all the time. Composting, food waste, let's get recycling back in. These initiatives, I've worked in the schools through the Recycling Commission for many years on solid waste issues, and they kind of phase in and out. You get a champion, you get a program going, a group of kids go through 2, 3, 4 grades, and then it fades out again. So part of the challenge working together will be to try to set that up so that it stays. And some of it is because, milk containers go from paper to plastic and back to paper, and so there are changes that are not within the school's control, but there are embedding issues that we need to work on to make sure they last. Next. Yeah, I know it's getting late. A couple of things here. There are student programs that students can get involved in. They can have a green team. I want you, if you can, to leverage your environmental clubs. You have several fledgling ones, I think, at different schools, and we could work together to support them better and lift them up and incorporate them or introduce them to established programs through Mass DEP or teams through Mass Environthon as a high school team, kind of like a robotics team or another team, but it addresses environmental issues. So you could launch a team that specifically addresses a sustainability question every year in a competitive environment that might be of interest to some students. And then there will be a lot with the Municipal Vulnerability Planning Action Grant reaching its conclusion. There's going to be discussion about those next steps, about tree planting, about invasives removal, about a lot of things where you can engage with the greater community or families can engage on these issues. And I actually had 2 capstone students approach me 2 days ago about wanting to do a townwide trash pickup, and I arm twisted them to also do invasives removal. And so I will be coordinating them with the Westford Conservation Trust and different town departments who have little pieces of this to try to keep them occupied and addressing some of these issues in April and May. We'll see how the weather, how far we can get with that. But that's another partnership. And I just love this piece of art. This is hanging in the hallway. You can see it on the way out. We're blessed here at Millennium, where thank you so much for letting me have an office, with the ability to see the student artwork. And this piece just struck me because this artist clearly feels connected with nature in a way that we've lost in some of our generations between mine and the students' generation, where we're not as connected with the natural world as we could be. And when it's 60 degrees out in February, we say, yay, I don't need a coat at recess, which I wasn't going to wear anyway, instead of thinking, wow, I've had too many days at 60 degrees in February without my coat. So I think some of that awareness and connectedness to the natural world comes through in this piece. But the other thing is, if those of you who may have seen the NFL playoffs may have seen an ad where the energy industry had an ad where things were disappearing. So like people's sneakers would disappear and different items from their life would disappear, and it was sponsored by an energy group, pro-petroleum energy group, because those things are made with petroleum-based products. So if we're going to stop using fossil fuels, things like traditional sneakers are going to change. And what this artist probably doesn't know is that Europe has made a deal with fungi manufacturers to produce sneakers out of mushroom leather. And there are fungi growing right on that sneaker. So I like the cyclical, zero waste type of thing. We have a lot of really new, exciting entrepreneurial efforts going on. You know, and where French fashion goes, whether we like it or not, will eventually end up in Marshalls. So the the sneakers of the world are changing, and so I just thought this really struck me for a number of reasons, and I'm very excited to be able to connect with your students on these issues, and I've tried to do that as different students and parent groups have reached out to me. So thank you.
Does the student know you used their art?
I got permission from the parent
Oh, that's cool.
That's
to
cool.
use the art, yes.
I'm wondering if you asked them about the mushrooms, because
It's really
maybe they
good.
might know.
I have not spoken with the student. I just corresponded with the parent to make sure it was okay, and I shared my, why I love this piece so much, but I haven't spoken with the artist.
I think I saw that ad that you just mentioned, but I had the volume down, and I was like trying to figure out I'm like, is this an ad saying how great plastic products are? Like that, and I was like, no, I'm misinterpreting, obviously.
Well, that's the way I interpreted it, but maybe I missed something.
I need to go back and watch it, because I was like, that's interesting.
It disappeared. It wasn't in the Super Bowl, and there were.
That's where I thought I saw it.
Did you see it?
Maybe I saw
It
something
was
else.
it was the previous game, I think, unless I missed it.
Interesting. Okay.
Our market is different.
Important.
The other thing you about advertising is what we saw in New England is not necessarily what was seen in the rest of the country. And so when I didn't see it, I thought it might have gone over better, maybe in other parts of the country than it went over here. And we got the Dunkin' Donuts ad instead. It was kind of my theory. But I don't know.
Marketed.
I'm not in advertising exactly. So that was a lot.
No, it's great.
Yeah, that was really, it was good. There's a lot going on, and I think there are a lot of things in there that spark things for me that I hadn't thought. A lot of them I had thought about, a lot of them I hadn't, and so I think that's a really good sign that you have a lot of energy and ideas around things where we can get involved, and I think that's kind of what we want to see. And with that, I will open it up to questions, and I see Sean with his hand up.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Sue. So, you were referencing that there was a district who had used metrics, right, to, I believe you said teacher satisfaction and outputs to do with like students and all
Lexington.
that. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you elaborate on that? Like what type of metric, or how they measured that? Like.
Well, I'd like to have the select board member whose presentation I saw come speak to Westford about net zero buildings in Lexington. Because they have several, not just schools. But the point of his presentation that I saw was that they pursued a net zero school out of concern for health and increased ventilation, and as well as the environmental health. And that they had surveyed and studied the performance of their students and their staff satisfaction after they implemented these changes and built this school. And he was just like, hands down, it was the best thing we ever did. And that was before, all of these new federal incentives. So I don't know precisely what they are, but I would love to have him come and share his experience, because now I think they're on their 4th net zero building. It's not just schools now, it's a library, and we are hoping to do a library that it won't be net zero, but we're hoping to incorporate a lot of these changes in that renovation. So I think it would be really great. And I would love to have people tour the school too if they were interested, and I can try to set that up for you guys.
Really interesting. That's interesting. Other questions for Sue?
I had a quick question. When you were talking about the EV infrastructure, charging infrastructure, and I know the mail courier van is soon?
Close.
Close?
Yes.
Soon.
And then we actually have another request for an additional EV vehicle for, for our finance director that's on March's town meeting. Remember that part of the
Yeah,
capital?
in the capital plan. Yeah.
Not for our finance director.
I'm sorry, facilities?
Facilities.
Did I say
Yeah,
finance?
I was like, did she say finance?
Yeah.
Like,
That's
no,
weird.
yeah,
Sorry.
Finance director
That's
is not
weird.
requesting a
Okay.
vehicle.
Yeah, facilities director, sorry. Why did I ask that? Oh, so it just had me wondering if you know offhand what what the usage has been of the stations that the town put in a year or two ago?
Well, it's interesting that you ask. I've been trying to collect the data so we can look at that and so we can establish a charging plan as now that we have a couple vehicles potentially here at Abbott and we're looking at a few more. Obviously, they'd be charging at night, so they wouldn't necessarily interfere with daytime charging. My impression anecdotally from working here is that we're still below the 15% threshold that is considered, you know, sort of minimum foundation. It's interesting with EV chargers, you don't really want to go above 30% utilization because then you end up with queuing, is what I've been told. So it is a narrow window, and also we are not unusual in terms of our municipal usage of charging. And the reason for that, ironically, I think, and again, there are a bunch of EV and hybrids that park in this lot during the day that I've seen. But if you live in Westford, the charge for the community aggregation contract for your electricity is 11 to 13 cents a kilowatt hour. That is not what's being charged out here in the parking lot. So if you're price sensitive, you're going to charge at home and not charge here. And a lot of the surrounding communities also have community aggregation plans in their towns. So it really may end up being more of a municipal charging space, depending. On the other hand, IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, makes used EVs and also lower priced EVs more accessible in the way the tax code works for purchasers. So depending on where people live, particularly if they're living in apartments where they can't charge at all, they may choose to charge here. And so that's a long way of saying I think we need to look at how we're pricing it, what we expect our charging infrastructure to do, and who our audience is. And once we understand that market, we'll know whether it's going to be used internally for municipal folks or for staff or for, you know, residents who come here while their kids at basketball. Like, we'll have to, it's a work in progress. But having those chargers was a grant-funded initiative that a lot of communities took advantage of and are learning from.
Okay, thank you.
So we're setting the price at the charging stations?
Yes, the towns can set the price at the charging station.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
didn't know that.
Catherine?
I'm just curious if you could speak a bit to the special, like our own fleet, that kind of student transport, special education fleet that we have. I don't know if you've dived into it much or explored it, but I would be curious to hear more of your thoughts on your evaluation of it. What steps forward, you know, kind of do you foresee that we could do in at least in that area? Because I know the yellow buses, you know, they're vendors, so it's kind of different. So I'd be curious to see any thoughts on that.
Well, I think that we're leasing most of our special ed fleet, which means that we can turn it over much more quickly if we get good pricing. We're still waiting to get definitive pricing. I believe that the schools have identified that the vendor can supply the vehicles that would be a one-to-one replacement of the current special ed vehicles. We'd look at a trial with a couple of them because, again, it's one of those issues that reflects staffing, it reflects routes, it reflects lots of things besides just the lower maintenance costs on the vehicle and the lower carbon. So all of those things are in the discussions that I've been having with the transportation folks. And also with the school buses, because we weren't taking, all of the federal money was aimed at taking diesel buses off the road and making sure they were destroyed, not reused by somebody else, but gone, not on the road anywhere. So if you didn't own a fleet, you were not eligible for that program. You had to certify that you own those buses and you were taking them off the road, period. So towns like ours would embark on a new contractual arrangement or consider a new purchase arrangement. And I see my role is trying to define the options and keep as many doors open for as long as we can so that we can see where we line up with our goals and our resources. But not to redefine, how far you can drive a particular special ed student. So we'd be very cautious in the way we would implement that so that we would trial and pilot and absolutely know for sure before we move forward. Does that help?
No, that's awesome to kind of get that thinking behind it and understanding the various kind of components to be considered.
Yeah, a lot of these decisions are multifactorial, so we have to work all of it.
Just to quickly follow up too, Jenny gave us an update at last week's finance subcommittee meeting that her and Jen Piper had met with an area company and are working on solidifying the pricing to make that trade-off equation between what leasing or repair costs are, and so it does sound like there's some solid progress.
And I've also investigated, for example, what part of this charging discussion came up because I was like, well, where are we going to park them? A lot of the, it's 2 or 3, maybe 4 are parked overnight now in the Abbott parking lot. So that would not disrupt those particular drivers, routine in any way. And then the question becomes, well, how are they, now they have a gas card, we would give them a card that would allow their charging to go straight to the appropriate budget or a key fob, some mechanism, so that, their job stays as routine and easy and understandable as possible. And obviously we would start local, well within, any charging limit.
Can I just say, one of the things that I've just really appreciated about getting to know Sue in this new role was that, yes, it's all overwhelming, right? And so, like, at first when you start seeing everything, and you said it earlier, but the best part is that then in the conversations and in the work that you've been doing, you break it down so specifically to be like, but if you just focus on this one thing, that's progress, and you're moving forward there, right? And one of the things we've talked a lot about is this what is something that we can sustain, right? Like, what is it something that we can do that we know will continue to have an impact that then isn't actually significantly changing somebody else's expectations? And so it's I just think it's been great, and I really appreciate all the work that you've been doing and the conversations that I think you've been engaged in. It's super helpful because you're not just coming and asking us to do X, Y, and Z. You're honestly just trying to help people identify resources. You're doing a great deal of the research in the first place to talk about things that exist that we wouldn't otherwise know about, which I think is really important because it is easy for other people to just point the finger and say, you should do X, Y, and Z, and that's not at all what is happening. Like, you've really been, I think, a valuable resource, and so I appreciate that.
Thank you so much. Yeah, well, it's not in our best interest to have a project that's a flash in the pan.
Right.
This is a multi-year effort, and we need it to be successful every step of the way. So I really try to make sure that I'm listening so that we think about those things, because if they fail, they discourage people, and we don't want to fail.
It's also interesting, like some of the things that you even just mentioned there, like the Stony Brook solar panels, right? So years ago, we removed the computer. There was one computer in the library that was...
I wondered where that went.
And we utilized the space for students to use for all of the interactive green screen work that they were doing, and it was just this one computer. Your idea of making it visible, because it was just literally one computer that nobody saw unless they went looking for it, And so now it's a question of take that information and put it on the screens that are already throughout the building, and or have like a regular update as to the power. And it's just a simple shift in how you're projecting that information, because years ago, people just didn't seem to be interested in it. So it was kind of like, well, let's just rethink that space. And so it just sort of, it became repurposed. And now it's a question of, because the solar panels are still there, they're still collecting energy, they're still doing all that work, and that would be a relatively easy thing to just make visible again.
Yeah, and that kind of communication, then, the kids at Blanchard might be like, well, why don't I have solar panels
Right.
on my roof? Like,
Right.
we can build
Working
that.
on that. We're working on that.
I'm working on that too. So,
It's prime for it, because there's so much sun over there.
That's right.
so I appreciate that.
I have a follow-up question about what you said about student leaders, and I think that's, you make a really good point, and I think that there's a couple of pieces to that puzzle. I think the first piece is you're right. There are, in any movement, there are leaders who emerge, and then if they move on or whatever, then things sometimes with a movement shake out, right?
Right.
And so, but I think the second piece to that is, having been the student activist myself, you need to have goals that are achievable, right? So some of the things that you're talking about are very long-term goals, and the way that adolescent brain development works is that you need to be able to see some of that.
Most of us are becoming more adolescent, so we need
Well,
we need
but,
some satisfaction along the way.
Along the way, and
Yeah.
then and there needs to be an idea that some projects. So I think like some of what you're talking about would be important for there to be someone to also be a guide or some type of, there should be like a task force or something like that. Like there should be something, some rubric that, or some like structure that helps harness some of that energy and at the same time keep the motivation going.
So there are a couple things I would see. First of all, if stays in your goals, it's going to be in the school improvement plans, right? So we work with the student councils to put that kind of thinking in place. And so maybe each grade level has a role, and as they move through the school, they work through that plan, and then you start the cycle again, or they move on to their sister school. The advantage we have, if you have the same group of students, which we don't always, but is that you can move them through. And that's actually how I was proposing composting would work, because Westford Community Composting has a fabulous model and the really rare success of having an ongoing program at the Academy for Food Waste, but pushing it down so that then because we have a risk of the leadership of that program aging out at Westford Academy. So you push it down, and then those kids move up, and then as we figure out if it makes sense to move it down, because it gets more complicated the younger the children get, then those families, if one set of sister schools, I don't know if that's what you call them, but one group community in town wanted to take on that initiative as like a neighborhood set of schools, you could pilot that way. So then you get 12 years, or if they have 3 kids, you get however many years that turns out to be, of that family driving that initiative forward. So it's also then becomes a community building effort, and not just a one champion or at each school, which is more what we've had in the past. One really fervent teacher or staff member or cohort of kids in a particular grade, and then they're gone, and we've lost them. But that's, again, something, baby steps. We start with one success, and then we recruit more people, and then we build it.
Sue, we could talk to you all night, but I want to respect your time and make sure we have time. So if there's a couple last questions.
No, mine was just like a small suggestion that, if our goal, if Dr. Drew's goal is sustainability, right, for his term, and I was just thinking that it could be a really good idea to have the different sects of government within the school, make it a requirement for them to hold something that is related to energy, sustainability, environmental things. That's like 8 or 9 different councils or groups of people that hold different positions within the school that do different things, right? So if we enforce maybe one event per year, that is their job, to get everybody involved, to have that participation. Student council, we do community service, we have a community service coordinator. So all these kinds of things, that delegation, I think, would be really helpful. And if each little group of government were to hold something, I think that could be a really good way for everybody to sort of move towards making an impact that way.
I think that
Makes
sounds
sense.
terrific.
Yeah. One last question? Gloria.
More of just a last comment. I mean, we would love to continue to engage with this. We've been having some really good conversations with our
sounds like
student
it.
advisory committee, particularly about, they've asked a lot of questions about lunchroom usage and how to infuse more sustainable practices into the lunch processes. And we would just love to continue the conversation.
I'd love that. I heard you sort of mention it earlier in the meeting, and I was like, I have to follow up, so let's follow up.
We'll connect.
Thanks.
Thank you
Thank you so much.
Thanks, sir.
It's a lot of exciting stuff, and we
Yep.
appreciate your expertise and
Oh,
your partnering.
thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Thanks, Sue.
One quick technical question: if there's a roadmap 2.0, is it going to replace the other one? Because if we're physically linking our strategic district improvement plan to the roadmap, I just want to make sure
The
we link
roadmap?
it to the right thing.
So the roadmap is a living document.
Yes.
The next step with version 2, after this last, we're going to create a set of really near-term priorities and send it to the select board for their approval or sign-off or understanding of version 2. And at that point, it will be linked on our site, and you can link to it. I've been hesitant with the transitions going on in town to move forward with that until the new town manager has had a chance to weigh in, and that the select board then can sort of give their stamp of approval on this one. But I already, gotten to know me a little bit. I already have thoughts for version 3. This document will continue to evolve, but it needs to come with some set of where our priorities are going to be and what the near-term things are. And so that needs to be discussed by the select board when they look at this next version.
Awesome.
So,
Thank you.
Thanks, Sue.
thank you.
That is going to bring us in our agenda to, sorry, I lost it already, to our 8:05 item, which is calendar. And I pulled it up. And so we visited this last time, we had a good discussion. This says draft 2. If we held them up side by side, the one we saw last time and this one, what changes would we see?
That's an excellent question.
I think wasn't there like a little,
I think it's
a little something that we were gonna change?
There was talk about the March, the fact that March was very crowded.
But we
didn't
at
make
the end,
any
we decided
changes.
that we were not gonna change anything there.
We did?
I thought that we said that they were gonna take a look.
I asked if the committee was directing the administration, and there was no
Right.
vote or comment. I point blank asked the committee, like, are
Sorry.
we
I
directing
totally
the administration to go off and come up with an alternative? And there was no response.
My recollection
Sorry.
was that we were looking at March, because I know we had mentioned that March and we discussed it. Okay.
The conversation continued to evolve, because then there were conversations about, recognizing where the professional development days actually fell in the different months. And so then you're right, towards the end, you had asked
Yeah, I
whether,
revisited right at
whether
the
there
end
was a
to
directive
see
for
if
us
we
to
were
change it,
directly,
and there
yeah,
wasn't.
wanting to ask for that.
Is it? Okay.
I don't think there's I looked at this earlier.
Yeah.
Do you know the difference? Are you looking to?
One of the things that we ended up changing was the early release key that's
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
purple. On October 5th, WA only was exactly where it is as you see it, but on November 20th and March 18th and 19th, the pre-K and pre-through 8 was at the end. So for consistency, we moved that to the beginning so it matched the WA.
Oh, right.
And I don't recall any other changes.
The only other one I noticed was the key, like the no school, early release, religious and cultural holidays used to be over here.
Yeah, we wanted
On
the
the-
colors on the left and then the
Yes.
blue on the right.
Right.
Yeah,
So
no,
that's
makes
right.
sense. I
Yep, you're right.
spent this morning going, what are the changes?
One of those puzzles. Circle the 5 changes.
Yes. was challenging.
But not a green circle, because those are major religious
Slash
cultural holidays.
Right.
October
So-
5th.
An X,
I
maybe.
think that
I
that's
didn't-
by
If we
design.
have to vote on this tonight, are we able to vote on it with the option of that we can still just come back and look at that March? So we approve everything else, but just say there's that March. I just think we're out of there.
I mean, we can kind of decide how we want to handle that, right? I mean, I will be honest, I thought I was really clear at the end of last meeting, because that was my entire intent, was to let them have time to do that and to
Yeah.
not send them off doing it if it wasn't the will of the committee, but
My
it's a new meeting,
recollection
and
was just that you were going to go back and relook at March, so
Okay.
I'm sorry we didn't. I don't know, should we have voted on that? Should we have given a
if there was,
directive?
if somebody had spoken up, then that was the next stage, like, okay, is there a consensus, or do we want to vote on this or something? That was sort of why I was asking the committee. I didn't want to sort of casually, if one person brings it up, I didn't want them to have to go off and have to rejigger the entire calendar. I wanted to
So
really
we
get a
needed
sense
to
of
make a motion.
if there was, yeah.
All right, okay.
But I do just want to mention, as Sandy was reworking some of these smaller cosmetic types of items on here, I did recap the conversation, and we took a look at March, and it was kind of like whack-a-mole, and we just kind of, for fun, we're playing around with where that other early release date could go, and if there was a spot, it was next to some other kind of crowded area. So we didn't see anything at a glance
Helpful.
that would have been helpful to your concern, to address that concern.
I think part of the issue is that there's already vacation in February and there's vacation in April, and
Right.
so it's kind of tough.
I think this is part of a bigger conversation longer term, though, anyway, about, I just, 2 early releases in the 1 week. I mean, you know what I mean? It's just, yeah, it's
Yep.
unfortunate.
Yep.
But I just still feel the need to advocate for our working families, I'm kind of disappointed that it wasn't even picked up as it was being drafted, because, it's a lot for people to ask, especially as there's more push for parents to come back into the office, and, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
I mean, my thought on that, and I had heard your concern, and I understood it, because ideally you wouldn't want to have those half days back to back in back to back weeks, but I can understand how administration kind of got hemmed in by the presidential primary on March 4th, and then Eid al-Fitr on April 10th. So to move it one way or another, yes, you might have avoided the half days back to back, but then you'd be creating the half day back to back with a week where there was a no school day for a professional development or for the
The
election.
question is, can
So-
you move that to an entirely different month? You know
And-
what I mean? It doesn't have to, you know what I mean?
And
That's what we're-
yeah, I mean, I thought the kind of administrative response to that at the time had been, yes, but then we'd run into squishing our professional development, like, instead of laying it out. So, I mean, I think it is incredibly important for this committee to stay aware of those things and to try and avoid it when possible. But it sounded to me, and this is where I thought we landed, was that while we wished there was an alternative, maybe this is one instance where there might not have been a good alternative. And if there was, I think administration was open to it, but I just don't think we found one.
We just kept looking at, because you're right,
Right.
moving it in
I-
March could then just move it to interrupt something else, and we talked about the notion of
Right.
the professional development is actually happening every other month consistently.
Yeah, I think it's, to echo sort of what I'm hearing from both, is it's like a necessary evil, right? Like, this is how we achieve our professional development with these half-days spread out. We just had a presentation tonight on what that why that professional development will be so important next year, right? So we do want our teachers to have that planning time and our staff to have that planning time and that time to focus on that. But I also really appreciate Catherine's point about maybe like a bigger picture conversation, right? Like, our calendar has sort of evolved over the last year or two with its inclusivity. Is this our best version? Is this best practice for planning time? Like, I feel like we, have talked about that over the years. So you know, is there a longer term conversation that won't save this year, but is, you know, on the cusp?
Yeah.
I think another thing that has been discussed, and I'm not necessarily suggesting it for next year or this particular calendar, but I think a discussion for next year that maybe the calendar committee would want to have is, would it be helpful to parents if there was more consistency? I think there's kind of two minds of
Right.
well, let's move it around because sometimes some days Wednesdays are hard for
Yes.
people versus
Right.
Thursdays versus Tuesdays, and let's move it around to kind of spread the fade. But then there's well, what if we made it every first Wednesday of the month, and everybody knew that on the first Wednesday of every month there's going to be this half day or so? But that doesn't always line up with vacations and whatnot.
Right.
But so I think there's an interesting conversation to be had, you know, in the future about how do you continue to let the calendar evolve to be both inclusive and workable for, especially for working families. And I think there is much, I mean, we've been through this process for a lot of years, and I think every year we get a little better at it. Like, the calendar's been getting a little more inclusive. I think there's been a little more awareness of trying to make it workable, and it's never going to be perfect because there are different challenges every year depending on how many election days there are and where the holidays fall. But I think just continue to iterate it and kind of continue to be aware of it and try and make it as best we can.
And not be afraid to do something different than what we've done in the past as well.
Exactly.
You know, and to say, oh, is there something we're not thinking of that we can
Right.
do that might be a shift, but,
Right.
you know, being open to that, you know, as a creative process to say what might we do in future years.
Well, and I think we've made
Be
huge
helpful.
strides over the last 2 years of trying to be more inclusive of a broader spectrum of religious and cultural holidays. And I think that's, you know, really important, and that's making a really important statement. And if we can continue to look at how half-days and things like that impact working families, and if there's ways to lessen that inconvenience and that burden, like, let's continue to do that in future calendars.
Well, also, when you think only 2 of our school buildings now are being used for elections, or, you
Right.
know, so I think maybe it does warrant a bigger conversation about, are we truly utilizing that time well, you know, and is there ways around it or thoughts around it? So it's more, let's get creative.
And I also think we have to think about what time of the year do we have these conversations too,
Yeah.
because I know sometimes depending on collective bargaining or other things that could impact calendar, like, we sort of commit to something and then we can't really change it. And so just if we were to ever look at it, you know, and say we might want to shift some things around, thinking about what, and I'm just not thinking it through right now, but what that right time would be to really look at it. And, you know, is the traditional time, sort of that mid-year, is that conducive to giving us enough time, you know?
Well, I know I said
to look at
last
those
year,
things.
having been on the calendar committee, I recommended in the meeting that we start this conversation in like October.
Right. And so
So,
that may be the
yeah.
thing to do.
I think we need to.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm going to make a motion to approve draft 2 of the school year 2023 to 2024 calendar.
Second.
Any final discussion? Okay, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? Okay, 6-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll do it again next year. And thanks again to Sandy for
Yes.
Some districts
making
do
it
2
work.
years at a time.
The continual.
We would never be able to go to that far.
Someday,
Change our
the
mind all the
organizational
time.
dream.
But I do appreciate, like you said, the behind-the-scenes work that's happening to
Yeah.
nudge the readability of it, you know,
Mhm.
because we did get that feedback last year, so.
It now has to be in color, or it's not read. Pretty soon, pretty soon it'll have to be like holographic, because it'll have like a third dimension to it. No, we're not gonna go there. Okay, our next agenda item is superintendent goals. So, just to set the table for this a little bit, I mean, per our policy and per good practice, we wanted to make sure that we check in on superintendent goals, so we're not getting to the end of May and then we're sort of like, oh, what happened? And we're just hearing about all the good things that are going on that advance towards all those goals. So Catherine and I met with Dr. Chu. We had a good conversation just about how do we want to present this, and I thought I thought it makes sense. I think what we agreed was that it would be pretty conversational. We're not going to be projecting anything, although I am apparently. We're not going to be projecting anything. It really is kind of a check-in on progression towards those. I could put the goals up if I can find
That would be helpful.
Yep.
I will do. I will
They're in the
look at
packet.
them.
Memo there.
They're in the packet. Thank you. That's
Yeah,
right.
Just to kind of
There they are.
direct us through.
And so we'll just sort of like touch on each of them, I think,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, so our conversation, we did talk about all 4 of the goals and what might be helpful, what information might be helpful to kind of share with everybody just as we're going through this process. And one of the things we talked about was that while the new superintendent induction program is a very specific goal that has, you know, very specific dates and activities and things, the question was, okay, well, what do you do? You know? And so, so I was going to share some of those things, right? So the different things that some of the different topics that we've addressed in our different content days that we've had. One of the things, and I think I shared this at one point as a little bit of frustration, was that in the fall we started talking about strategy, right? And they talked about strategy versus a plan and the strategic district improvement plan. And I expressed my frustration with them that would have been a great thing to talk about last spring instead of after we were already expected to be working on the strategy. But that was one of the things that we've done quite a bit with. We spend a lot of time looking at the READY framework, which is DESE's, the Racial Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion framework. We looked at it last year, and this year we've gone much deeper into unpacking the different areas of it and talking in terms of what does that mean in our district and where are our districts at in terms of utilizing the framework, knowing that even within the state of Massachusetts, there's a wide variety of ways in which I think communities even communicate. And so some of the language that DESE might be using might not necessarily be the exact same language. So as superintendents, we're trying to have a universal understanding of the different elements, but not necessarily imposing all of that same language. I'll just use a perfect example. Like, as a district, Westford, we have really embraced belonging. We have really talked about what does it mean to belong for every single person, students and staff members. And we are approaching that as the umbrella, knowing that diversity, equity, and inclusion has very specific avenues underneath that belonging. Well, DESE includes belonging as just one specific piece that's not as specific. And I think I just disagree with that. And I feel like as a district, we have been able to use that, I think, as an umbrella that has driven a lot of our work and made, I think, conversations and the concept of that every single child should feel like they are welcomed and that they do belong and that they are seen in their classroom as well as staff too, I think is important. So those are some of the things we do. We had a content session that was preparing for difficult conversations. And at first when I saw that, I thought, well, okay, if you're a superintendent, it might be a little late for the idea of being prepared. But then the way in which we broke down that session was actually very helpful because we all identified a specific difficult conversation that might be, on our minds and talking through. We do a lot of case studies, whether we're looking at something that NCEP is presenting to us, or most of the time this year it's been we're bringing something that we then will use a very specific protocol with our coaching table group. So you've all met Dr. Matt King. So he coaches another superintendent, and we work with another coach and another superintendent as well too. So we're constantly collaborating. So those types of things I think have been really helpful. We did one session specifically we were asked to assess our conflict and negotiation styles. So there was a survey that we took, and it told us, it was almost like a personality test, right? And then you kind of looked at that, and then we talked through that, and we talked through specifically with negotiations and conflict, the ability to understand where you naturally or authentically enter this conversation, and then where you might benefit from, building skills in other areas as well too, which I thought was
So what
helpful.
house were you sorted into?
So what house was I sorted into? I was.
You don't have to answer.
Yeah, listen, I'll tell you. I'll tell you that. some
Yeah,
other
we're
time.
curious.
Yeah, right. I actually I would like to say that I did not fall squarely into one house.
There you go.
So I was like, oh, wait a second, because then you was like, if you had between a 7 to a 9, and I was like, actually, I was living in multiple areas there. So I was like, I thought that was okay, right? So that's kind of what's been happening with NSEP. There is one of the things it talks about, like us doing assignments. The assignments literally are preparing these case studies and having these conversations, which I think is really helpful.
And practical.
And practical. Yeah, it is practical. Although some of them a little late, but that's okay.
I imagine the benefit, though, is just the conversations with other superintendents.
It
Like,
absolutely
that's-
is.
That's
And
where the benefit is, I imagine.
my wife always likes to tell a story about a family member. Probably we've all had this family member who probably said the same thing about the idea, like if you put your problems in a bag and pass the bag
Right.
around, you'd be happy to get your own bag at the end of the night, right? I feel that way every time I go to one of these. There's always going to be somebody who's going to have a story, and I just go, okay, all right, we're doing okay. We are doing okay. So that's NSEP. That's where we're at with NSEP. And then the next piece, the next goal is the sense of belonging, right? Specifically our student learning goal. And my goal is to articulate and exhibit how each principal is prioritized students centering student and staff voices in assessment and development of student and staff sense of belonging within all of our learning environments. And what I've been focusing my conversations with them on mid-year here is specifically talking about the panorama data, knowing that we're using more than just panorama to measure this, but talking about panorama. And I think one of the more interesting discoveries that I've made, which I will share with you without getting into all the school-specific stuff, you'll see things in the school improvement plans that will be addressing this more specifically. But one of the things that was new to me was in my conversations with the pre-K to 2 principals, since the teachers actually fill out the panorama perspective for their students, because their students aren't really able to fill that out, the teachers fill out a perspective. It's actually giving us 2 data points, right? It's giving us the perspective that the teachers have on how their students are doing, but it's also giving us a perspective on how the teachers perceive their students. And so that's something that we talked about, because the 3 to 12 principals have been, talking about their connections with with adjustment counselors and the guidance counselors, and making sure the teachers, how are they going to use this information if there's something that they're not aware of that comes up with Panorama, because a lot of it is sharing information that they're aware of in the first place, and so it might just be validating things that they already knew. And we've talked about the toolkit that exists, or the toolbox that exists with Panorama for teachers to be able to utilize over time and provide more professional development for them to access that. But this notion that the principals now can look at how multiple people, because when you think of the longitudinal data, you might, in the pre-K to 2, you could potentially have 4 different adults fill out this survey for a student over time, and that in itself is interesting. And so that was something that we kind of talked about, which I thought was something that I had not considered, my experience being primarily 6 through 12 in the first place. And then when I first looked at the Panorama data, I was looking at how the staff had filled it out, I was looking how the students had filled it out, but there wasn't necessarily a correlation with the data that I was looking at. So I think that was really interesting. The third goal is really about supporting our new principals, our Abbott principal, Mr. Meyerson, the Stony Brook principal, Ms. Hammer, and our Miller principal, Ms. Boylan, who started a little bit earlier than them, but still was very eager to get support as a new principal, our Director of Equity, Curriculum, and Instruction, Ms. Ronan, and our Director of School Finance, Ms. Lynn. I haven't established separate meetings with Jenny Lynn, because I actually talk to her almost on a daily basis. And you've seen all of the work that she's been doing, and you've seen that she's coming here and presenting. So whereas in the original goal, I was like, I'll have a separate meeting. we have a standing meeting on Tuesdays, our central office leadership meeting, and I feel like the work that we're doing there, and then just the interactions that both Carrie and I have with Jenny, which really is on a daily basis, is making sure that we are supporting that work. I do have standing meetings with Magali where I'm able to provide feedback and she's able to share updates with me and things that she's working with that I wouldn't necessarily be seeing on a regular basis, which I think has been really helpful. And I've been meeting with the principals at the 3 elementary schools outside of my typical visits as well, which I think has been really helpful. And out of that, other than the fact that I'm having separate meetings with the 3 of them, if you visited any of our leadership meetings, or if you were just a part of any of those conversations, I don't think you would be able to identify who the new principals were, which that just really speaks to their involvement and their, I think, ability to really jump in and participate in, I think, a really positive manner. And I'm really happy about that. And then the last goal is the strategic district improvement plan, which you've actually seen a great deal of, right? Both Catherine and Gloria have actually seen the working document, which we're going to be presenting to all of you in our next meeting. It's been a part of our agendas throughout the year. The work with SMMA and the feasibility study has been a big piece of the work that's included there. And so I feel like, other than that's the one that you probably see on a regular basis. But those are the just different things that I was going to share that we had sort of talked about. If you have any questions or comments or thoughts, happy to hear.
And it's just good to revisit the goals before the end of the, right? Like for us all to remember, oh yeah, that's where you were hoping to go, throughout the course of the year.
I don't have a comment specifically on the content of it, but I just got to say structurally, the fact that we're having this discussion now is very much appreciated, right? Like, and I know that, and that's a kudos to our chair and our vice chair to actually close the loop on a discussion that we had last year to, have this discussion more often, right? So I appreciate everyone who allowed this to happen, right? So we're not just having it in May.
Right.
Right.
The other thing that's going to come out of this is that we're going to have a document, hopefully, this late spring, that doesn't drive us all bananas trying to edit.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So that's the one thing.
Make everybody
we're gonna
happy
try
with
and
that.
Yeah, we're going
Yeah.
into it having an understanding as to
Oh, man.
what everybody's thinking.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other comments?
Can you speak a little bit about the standards?
Mm-hmm. So in terms of, well, first of all, in terms of how that evidence, some of it I think will still be qualitative and some will be quantitative, as we look at it.
Mm-hmm.
We had adjusted the standards specifically based on feedback that I received from you and when I met with Catherine and Chris to talk about looking at the data-informed decision-making, which is going to be the standard one, which I think is really supporting that first, well, you have that there. I'm going to scroll back and look to see how we've broken these down, right? But that actually supports a couple of the goals themselves. So they're not directly linked. Standard one is going with goal one or standard two.
Yeah,
They sort of, they hit multiple angles of them and they cross through them, right? I think the bigger piece and what we saw last year was questions about what the data is, right? So I feel like that's going to be a piece going into it, which is helpful with the conversations that we had, because there were things that I think is observable that you would automatically know, and then there were some questions as to whether it was or not. So one of the things we talked about was even creating like a Google folder where as we approach that, we can kind of be sharing information so that, similar to one of the things I shared with you last spring, when I have been evaluating people, whether it was teachers, whether it was administrators, if I had questions about evidence, I would be able to follow up with them and ask them about it. And that's not, we just didn't have that opportunity. And so I feel like we will this year, so that there won't really be any, it doesn't mean that you'll like it, right? You still might not like it, but at least there'll be questions. If you have questions about it, we can kind of clear that up. And if you think you need to see something more, you can do that without feeling like you're being asked to evaluate something, overnight, and you weren't given appropriate things to consider.
Yeah, I think my two quick thoughts on that is that I struggle with, and hopefully what you just spoke to will help, is that we're all seeing the same evidence, right? Because
Yes.
then that removes some layer of the subjectivity of
Yeah.
7 people, looking at something and getting a rubric with it. But when we're going through the goals, even, I have a hard time with what's sort of public data and what's not, right? There's a lot that's like you giving feedback on a principal's goals or on a principal leading a meeting. I don't expect that we would ever see those specifics. So it's just like,
That's true.
what do we point to that
So that's one of
says-
the things that we talked about, right? Like the idea of even what you should be able to see, which is why the second goal with the sense of belonging, with that when I'm talking about working with all the principals and articulating how they're centering student voices and staff voices, that should be reflective in the school improvement plans, which is a public document. So I'll help make that connection, right? Because you're right, you're not gonna see any of their evaluations.
Right, I don't want to.
Right.
I mean,
Right,
that's not
right.
our
But
purpose.
that's
yeah.
one of the things we
Right.
talked about is, okay, what public thing can we point to that actually should help to exhibit that?
Okay,
Yeah.
I
Does that help?
appreciate that
Yeah.
is being worked in.
In theory, someday maybe like panorama data. I mean, I think we're so early that we don't have trends. We don't,
Right.
like it's too difficult right now.
Right.
But you could see something like that. But
I
yeah, I
think
think the
we'll
school
see
improvement
it.
plans, especially with the new timing,
Yeah.
the school improvement plans are a great way of
We've
seeing.
got a good bit of panorama, already kind of.
But we don't have an update for this. It'd be
But
hard
we
to.
should have an update though.
Yeah,
We will,
that-
though.
that-
I mean,
that's a
we've
quick-
done
yeah,
it again,
right,
we've done it
right,
again.
yeah.
I think
So-
the bigger issue with Panorama is that Panorama is really a great tool, but it's only one piece.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing, is we want to make sure that we're using it and we're utilizing it effectively, but that we're then triangulating it and connecting it to the other pieces of data, whether it's informal or whether it's even just other survey data or just achievement data that helps us to get a sense of the whole picture, But, were there any other questions you had about the standards, Valerie?
No,
Does that help?
Yep, thank you.
I actually would like to kind of, I'm going through a lot of them there, and I kind of see, the work we've done so far and the discussions we've had. I think the one standard that maybe I might need a bit more help with, like as the year progresses, is probably on that kind of communication piece. We're saying engages in regular 2A culturally proficient communication with families about student learning and performances. So I'm not saying, you need to speak to it now, but maybe it's something to kind of focus on, because I think I'm not naturally seeing it maybe in some of the goals where it might show up as easy as some of the other standards. So I think I would find it helpful if you could help me on that one.
And I think refresh my memory, I think we linked it a little. I'm trying to think where we linked.
I know we said the webinar with the STIP.
So that early SDIP webinar, and then, you're right, that was part of that.
So I think
Yep.
so. I think we were kind of thinking more, definitely the STIP was one place it
Yep.
could happen.
And then on the back side of it, there'll be some,
We also knew that there would be multiple conversations even throughout the feasibility
in
study.
the feasibility, right?
That we're
Yeah,
talking about too.
that
Right.
was, yeah, okay.
Okay. No, it's good though
Thank you.
to try to remember and try to think about how that manifests itself and
Yeah.
what we're gonna be looking
Right.
for, right? Thank you. Anything else on goals? Otherwise, we'll keep checking in and we'll look at these again in a few months. Thank you.
Thank you.
Back to my personnel update in the packet.
This is the time of year when we start to get information on end of year and who may or may not be returning starting next school year. And I would be remiss not to point out the fact that Susan Dubois, principal of Nabnasset, is listed on here as she is retiring at the end of the school year. And she's had 36 years in education. 23 of those years were here in Westford. 23 years ago, she was hired as an assistant principal at Nabnasset and did that for just a year and a couple of months before her principal retired, and then she was appointed the interim for the remainder of that year, interim principal, and then reapplied and continued in that position. And there is no doubt Nabnasset is the gold standard for schools and community and climate and culture. She will be missed very, very much. And with both her and Joanne retiring, there will be a new identity that has to be established there at Nabnasset. So in terms of process, we will be posting for her position in the next week or so, and throughout the month of February, we'll be getting resumes and applicants, and then we'll start the process sometime in March, and our hope, that usually runs about 3 weeks or so, and our hope would be by the end of March or very early April, the superintendent will ultimately appoint a new principal starting next school year.
Are we going to have kind of a panel that we did for last year's principal searches? Because I think
Exactly.
they were very
That was,
successful.
yeah,
It
that was really effective. We're gonna follow the
Yeah,
same,
that
the
was
same,
amazing.
the same practice that we did last
Yeah.
year. Yeah.
They worked very well.
Big shoes to fill.
Big, yeah.
Big shoes to fill.
It was,
Big
very-
stylish
I'm
shoes.
very excited
Always
for her, very sad
stylish
for
shoes.
us.
Big stylish shoes.
Thanks. Okay. What else?
I'm thinking a motion to
first.
adjourn.
We'll accept that motion. And
Second.
Catherine, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Great.